So here is my article review. You guys have to do one, and it's a big chunk of your grade. So I'm going to do this short and quick. I don't want to go over 10 minutes, so I'm going to go fast. So here's my article review. The title of the article is Four Attachment-Based Categories of Emotion Regulation in Adolescent Psychic Troubles. Here, let me pull it up for you. It wasn't a very long one. It's about 9-10 pages. Without all the quotes and citations. But here it is, and let's get going. So there's the title. Who were the authors? The authors were all French. This all took place in France at the Paris City University. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people worked on this paper. It was published in Frontiers in Psychology here in America. And National Mental Health, all the big people, the government put into it. So that's what gave it credence for me. So I thought I'd give it a read here. And the purpose of this article was, how do the four types of attachment, right? Attachment is how well you feel loved and like you're part of something emotionally with people, socially. They are secure, disorganized, avoidant, anxious. These have different names. You're going to find that out here in a minute or two. So how do these four types of attachment influence emotion regulation processes? So in other words, emotion regulation. How does that change from the different four types of attachment, right? So let's get going with the rest of this. The research design. What did they do? So the research design, that's the who, what, and where kind of thing. So let's start off with the who. They had 61 inpatient adolescents admitted into an urban psychiatric crisis unit during 6 months not too long ago, or about 5 years ago. There were 61, they're all European, teenagers from between the ages of 13 and 19. 3/4 of them were girls, females. Their average age was 15 years old with a standard deviation of about 1.3 years. Over half of them belonged to rich families. They're coming from money. Most of them were already under psychotropic medication, and about 4/5 of them had at least one psychotropic treatment before they got hospitalized. Their average stay in the hospital for these 61 teenagers was 22 days. So you're dealing with a lot of very, very disturbed individuals. A little less than half of them had hurt themselves. About 1/5 of them were aggressive. 1/3 of them already had been diagnosed with some serious disorder, etc., etc. So again, 1/3 of them had eating disorders. About 2/5 of them had bipolar disorders, and again, about almost 1/4 of them had some serious psychosis. So these kids need a lot of help. Okay, so what was the research design? What they did was they took a bunch of measures. This is what they were measuring in this test. And it was attachment, which was a variable, right? These are your variables. So attachment, they made everybody in, all 61 of them was put into one of the 4 levels. And alexithymia, which I had to look up here, I'll tell you what it means. That was a continuous variable. So in other words, the higher the number, the more the alexithymia. Same with empathy. They measured empathy. The higher the number, the more empathy. And facial emotion recognition. Same one. The higher the number, the better they can recognize emotions on other people's faces. And in its defense mechanisms, that was nominal. They came out with a bunch of defense mechanisms. I'll tell you about it when we get there. But these were their surveys, right? So I expect you to look at the surveys. Look at attachment, right? What was the name of it? Basically, how does it work? These surveys had 4 paragraphs where each subject would pick the right answers on a 7-point scale, whether it applied to them or not. And from that data, they were put into one of the 4 attachment categories. So again, secure, anxious or preoccupied, fearful is also known as avoidant. I don't think it's anxious and avoidant. And dismissive is also the avoidant. But it doesn't matter. There's 4 different categories, okay? And this survey right in there It said it had adequate validity and reliability. Didn't give you the numbers, but at least it said that they had it in there. That's what we're looking for in every one of these surveys. Next one, it was alexithymia. Now, what that means is that's difficulty experiencing and identifying and expressing emotions. So that doesn't mean they don't have emotions. That just means they have difficulty using them. Okay, so, and here is the survey for that one. And it broke everything down into 3 subscales, right? Difficulty in identifying feelings, describing feelings, and externally oriented thinking about the feelings, okay? So now this is what it said about its reliability and validity. Considerable work has gone into the testing of its reliability and validity, but it doesn't say what the numbers were, so we don't know if this thing is good at measuring anything or not. So big question mark with that survey. Next was empathy. And this is the survey they used, interpersonal reactive index. So this is how they took it, and it had a good reliability. So in other words, this survey, the questions were strongly correlated. Okay, so in other words, this survey was good at measuring empathy. Defense mechanisms. Okay, this is the person who made it, the Bond and Valiant guys. And shoot, this is kind of old, right? This is about 37 years old, kind of old. But they had 88 questions, which is kind of a lot, right? So 88 questions, and they're trying to come up with different types of defense mechanisms, which makes it a categorical variable. Their results were kind of shocking. They came up with 25 separate ones, right? They ran a factor analysis. And factor analysis said there's 25 different groups here. So what they did was they turned all of the 25 groups and they mapped them into one of the 3 heading types. That's what I'm calling. So mature includes all these, including humor, right? I won't say anything about that. The second one was neurotic. And it shows what that was all inclusive there. And the last one was immature. So out of the 25 defense mechanisms, they broke them down into either mature, neurotic, or immature. And there was absolutely no mention of validity or reliability about this scale. So again, question mark, question mark. Moving on up. Facial emotion recognition. This one really kind of caught my eye. Because, right, some people do not recognize facial expressions on other people. So there's the survey, and this was kind of interesting, right? They had 3 men, 3 women, each expressing 6 of the emotions of interest. And here they are, right? Sadness, anger, happiness, disgust, surprise, and fear. And what they did was they morphed those pictures from plain Jane into one of the 6. And these people had to identify what they thought they were talking about, okay? So, and they said right in there that it was empirically valid and reliable. But again, they don't give you any numbers, so I was kind of curious about that. All right, down to their hypotheses. There's only 2 hypotheses in this article. First one was the dimensions of attachment. In other words, the 4 attachment levels, are they correlated with the levels of emotional regulations explored, right? So their emotional regulations were recognition, empathy, alexithymia, and the defense mechanisms. These were all the other surveys that we just talked about. And their second one was, is it possible to distinguish different modalities of emotional regulations according to their attachment group, right? So remember, 4 different attachment groups. Can we make some kind of connection between one of the 4 attachment groups with one of the modalities of the emotional regulation? Okay, so that's pretty interesting to me. So here's what they did, data analysis. They took some of the demographics and they compared age, sex, and psychotropic numbers. They don't say how, they just did. But the only 2 tests that I found in here were Spearman's correlations and t-tests. So a Spearman's correlation is like a Pearson's correlation, but that means the data wasn't, it violated too many assumptions like normality, and actually it's normality of the standardized residuals, but you don't need to know that. Or the data was ordinal. So in other words, this is a non-parametric correlation and t-tests. And I'm going to show you the results here in a second. Now they also used the Kruskal-Wallis test to see if there was any significant difference in the mean levels of their variables, right? Empathy, face emotion recognition, alexithymia, and the defense mechanisms. Well, again, which was categorical. I don't know how they did that, but we won't go there. So the Kruskal-Wallis is like the one-way between group ANOVA. It's the non-parametric version. And they use the R software. And the results kind of went like this. This is a quote. I simply cut and pasted it out of there. Significance positive effect on age and face emotion recognition sensitivity. So what that tells me is when age increases, their ability to recognize facial emotions gets better. That's it. Now this one was even worse. Significant positive effect on gender. Okay. Which gender? Males or females? It doesn't say. So on the effective empathy and defense mechanisms, effective empathy as well as immature and neurotic defenses mechanisms were more frequent in young women than in young men. So in other words, young women had higher empathy, and the immature and the neurotic, you remember those 25 things? They had more of those, higher of those, than the young men. But I didn't really see that. Okay, so the strengths of this study were, it's brand new, just boom, right off the thing. It was published in May. The population was good, right? They had 61 very, very seriously ill young people, right? So again, these weren't your regular kids. These are the kids that had been spending at least 3 weeks in a psychiatric hospital. So they're severely in need of help, right? Okay. So in some of the measures really piqued my interest. Emotion regulation. I've been reading about that lately, just the last year or two. And they're trying to come out with a measurement on how to measure the way a person regulates their emotion. So that caught my brain. And, dealing with emotions, processing emotions, recognizes emotions. That's what that is. And empathy, I know what that is. And facial recognition. I never thought about that, but you're right. Some people don't recognize facial recognition. And I'm sorry about all the jumping around here. I used a template, and it's all crazy. And it was very concise, right to the point. It was very well written and easy to follow. I think anybody could read this sucker. What I didn't like about it was that defense mechanism variable, right? If you remember, they ran a factor analysis. They came up with 25 unique types. That's 25 groups. You can't use 25 groups in an ANOVA. That's ridiculous. And the second part was they didn't tell us anything about how they decided to put each of these 25 defense mechanisms into just 3 different headings, right? Remember, the mature, neurotic, or immature, there was no mention of the criteria of what they used to put them into these 3 things. And again, it had no mention of validity or reliability, so that automatically makes me questions. And their output was kind of, their final results were kind of skinny, right? There's hardly anything there. So these top 2 are the correlations, right? Age, if you'll notice, the only whole thing on the correlations is the only thing that's significant is age and sensitivity. So in other words, when age increases, so does their sensitivity because it's a positive correlation. The rest of these are all kind of crap. None of them are significant, right? They're practically all 0. Kind of huge waste of time. But maybe these were the ones that were interesting them. Who knows? I do not know. Now, the bottom part, you look at the males and females. These are all t-test results, right? So this first one, sensitivity. There's the average male score is 31.7. The average female score is 29. And look at these t-test statistics. They're freaking gargantuan, right? They're laughably large. 418 That's giant. I think they might have missed something with the decimal points. Maybe not. But if not, these t-scores are so large that the results become highly questionable. I'll just leave it at that, right? So the results are highly questionable because their t-scores are way too big, way too big. All right, what else? Again, the results not that impressive. It was more like a qualitative study than a quantitative study. Let me put it that way. It had a lot of good reports and a lot of charts and graphs and a lot of numbers, percents, and that kind of stuff. But the tests they ran are kind of, again, they're kind of elementary, kind of pedestrian. So I would rate this overall. I'd probably get a B minus because I was curious about some of the measures, but they had attachment style. Attachment style is seen it a million times. It is way overused in statistics these days. But again, I am not a psychologist, so I don't know if it's important or not. So, and again, that defense mechanism variable, they need to come around and do something with that. You cannot come up with 25 different defense mechanisms. You have to think of a better way to group them together. But now, lastly, what I've always believed is that emotions regulate us. They regulate our behaviors, not the other way around. We don't regulate our emotions. Emotions regulate us. So I'm going to leave you with that right there, and this show is over. So I hope you liked it. Now remember, your presentation should be just like this, and I hope it helps. MGZ out.